The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 25. Draco's Army. Draco holed away in his room that night to write to Hermione. Quite the creature lesson today. Hope Hagrid wasn't too upset, the old oaf. Can't believe he actually had the bollocks to trot out a herd of Thestrals. By the way, his injuries still looked fresh. Wonder why?
Please, don't call him an oaf. And the Thestrals were highly interesting. I wish that evil cow would mind her own. As for his injuries, I've wondered the same. Perhaps they're magical ones, spelled not to heal.
Giants don't usually possess magic, so unless one of them got a hold of a wand, I doubt it. Maybe he just keeps walking into trees.
It was several minutes before she replied. How did you know about the giants?
Draco paused. He'd heard from his father, of course, who had heard it from other Death Eaters. But confirming for Hermione that his father was one was a big step. He sighed. He was in too deep to turn back now. My father mentioned it. His side thought Hagrid was killed by them. She answered, It does seem like they've made an effort. A moment passed, then more of her thoughts appeared.
Draco, please. I told you we were forming a club. If your father asks if anyone is planning anything against Umbridge or Voldemort, please don't tell your father, or anyone associated with him.
He responded immediately, I wouldn't betray you, or anyone else doing whatever it is you're doing. He paused, then wrote more. Is there anything I can do to help?
Her reply came quickly. I don't think so, right now, other than keeping our secret.
Of course I will.
And he would do everything in his power to do just that.
The next morning he emerged from his dormitory, trudging down the steps to the common room. It was surprisingly empty, but then again the weather was supposed to be sunny today, which meant that it was one of the last nice autumn days before the tedium of a Scottish winter. He idly wondered if he could convince Hermione to meet him at the far side of the lake for a picnic. Classes had been called off for St. Andrew's Day. Apparently Umbridge was good for one thing, making sure that Hogwarts observed all of the Ministry's days off. Just the man I was hoping to see. Theo was pulling off rain boots and a jacket. As an early riser, he'd probably watched the sunrise after a 5-mile jog. Draco yawned tiredly. What's up? He asked. You remember, of course, the topic of conversation from the other night? Draco stopped short. You mean your idea about learning defensive magic? Yeah, I've had a few ideas. I want to run them past you. First, I was thinking we need a meeting space. Somewhere, it wouldn't be unusual for us to be together, but a place we can keep people out that we don't want.
Right.
Vince and Greg always wanted to hang out with the other 3 boys, and at times it was hard to shake them off. Then there were a handful of 3rd, 4th, and even a few 6th years who had tried taking to join their group at meal times or in the common room. So the immediate problem is what to do with bacon and eggs. I was thinking, maybe we should say that we're forming a diet and exercise group. They'll run away faster than a kappa from sesame oil. Do kappas not do try and keep up, Drake. So, anyway, I'm thinking we use classroom 4 down the corridor. There's an office in back. We can have workout equipment and also work on defensive spells in there. The classroom itself is rather damp and musty, so no one will be tempted to go in.
Yeah, that should work. Who all will be talking about here?
Well, so far, it's you and me and Blaze. I think Violetta could be persuaded to join us, but she's afraid.
Best leave her off, then. Let's keep it to just us.
You're probably right. If she joins up and ends up lusting after me, it'll make things pretty awkward.
Theo leered knowingly. Quit being an absolute skis, Theo. I haven't even eaten breakfast yet.
Perfect. And then your diet's already started. Get Thorne and send a post to Quality Quidditch Supplies. We need a weight set, a punching dummy, some mats, exercise bike, and a massage table.
Theo pulled an apple from his pocket and bit into it.
Chip, chip. Delivery has to get all cleared by Filch, and I want to start tomorrow night.
What the hell are you going to do with the massage table? Draco asked, almost afraid to hear the answer.
Was I not clear that Violetta might join?
Quit perving, you sick tosser. Draco summoned the apple from Theo's hand, then threw it back, aiming for body mass.
Fine. Maybe a house elf is looking for extra work,
Theo cried to his retreating back as he left the common room for breakfast.
I'm not listening,
Draco called over his shoulder without turning. Supplies ordered after breakfast, Draco walked down to the Quidditch pitch to see what was what. Several members of the Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff teams were conducting an informal scrimmage. Some students were doing yoga along the banks of the Black Lake, led by Luna Lovegood. Blaze was reclining nearby, pretending to read a book, as he watched the witch over the tops of the pages. Potter was taking advantage of the day off to use the weasel's inferior broom. This might mean that Hermione might be free to meet. He removed his handkerchief from his pocket and pretended to wipe his brow. Vinca Major.
Can you meet for a picnic in a couple of hours? I can get Dobby to make us something.
You know he isn't your servant any more, right?
Sorry. I can ask Dobby to make us something.
Where do you want to meet? He looked at the Black Lake again, teeming with students. The chances that they'd both be able to sneak away without being waylaid was minimal.
12:30. The Astronomy Tower.
I'll be there.
Dobby was a good friend, and happily packed cold roast chicken sandwiches and cherry tarts, along with elderflower juice in a basket, which he promised to deliver to the tower at 12:25 exactly. Draco finished his jog and hurried to the prefect bath to clean himself up, pointedly ignoring the salacious looks from the mermaid painting over the tub. He arrived just as Dobby was settling the basket on a striped blanket spread out on the stone floor that had been warmed by the sun for the last few hours. He called his thanks just before the small elf popped away, and just as Hermione rounded the corner of the stairs.
"Your picnic, madam," he said, bowing and gesturing broadly. She narrowed her copper eyes, even as she smiled.
"These sandwiches look professionally made, good sir. Did you make them?"
Services provided by a good friend," he said, settling down on the blanket and pulling her down to sit in his lap.
"It's good to have friends in high places,"
she murmured, as she nibbled his ear softly.
"Yes, my girlfriend lives in the highest tower in this place, you know."
He stroked his fingers up and down her back, enjoying how she writhed under his touch.
Do I know her?"
she asked innocently.
"You know everything, Swat. Don't pretend you don't,"
he teased as he licked a spot just under her ear. She squirmed a bit, in delight.
"You're right. I also know that I still have an arithmancy essay to write, and a potions project to work on today, so let's eat."
With that, she moved to sit on the blanket and began unwrapping sandwiches and tearing open packets of crisps. Draco poured the elderflower juice, which she pronounced perfect, and they discussed their classes, Umbridge, and what they knew or suspected about Hagrid's travels. Neither could figure out where the fresh injuries were coming from. Both were impressed by the Thestral lesson. Draco told her the cleaned-up version of seeing Abraxas die, and she talked a bit about her own grandfather, Louis, who had died whilst she was at Hogwarts when she was 13. He asked how the new club was going, and if she had ideas for him, as he and Blaze and Theo would be starting their own version of it soon.
"Oh, Draco, wow, that's a good idea.
I would suggest that you join ours, but—"
"Yes, I think that would go over about as well as the blast-ended screws."
"You're right. Well, we started with a disarming charm, then shield charms, stunning spells, of course. Harry has taught us several impediment jinxes and the like. I think his plan is to cover bombardments, reducting curses, and the like, and at some point he wants to teach us how to cast a Patronus." Draco was secretly impressed. He wasn't sure that he would be able to do half of those things, and told her so. I can maybe help?" she asked tentatively. "What do you mean?" "Well, you've said that Blaze and Theo already know about us. Maybe I can come and teach you three a bit. Just the things we've covered so far." He kissed her hard, then. That this brilliant witch would be willing to show him and his friends these things, it made his stomach flip. She kissed him back eagerly, threading her fingers into his hair and tugging gently. He smiled down at her, and she shivered. "Warming charm?" he asked, and she smiled against him, patting the blanket beside them for her wand and casting it with a whisper. He was snogging her again when an odd flutter sounded nearby, followed by a pecking noise. They broke apart to find Marmalade, Theo's russet-colored owl, peering at them from around a note in her beak. "And who are you, lovely?" Hermione asked. Marmalade preened, dropped the note, stole half a chicken sandwich, and flew away. "That's Marmalade, Theo's owl." "What a clever name!" "I suppose," Draco said, unfolding the note and reminding himself to ask Theo what his fascination with breakfast foods was all about. The note read, "Stuff is here. They delivered it to the common room. Come help me move it and arrange it all before everyone else is back." He sighed. Plans scuppered by one of his best mates. Hermione smiled. "I need to go anyway. The essay, you know. It's only supposed to be 18 inches. Mine is 23, but I still need to finish my last body paragraph and write the conclusion." She reached once more for her wand, but when she picked it up, they were both surprised to find in her hand Draco's hawthorn one. She had left her own wand across the room in her bag. You cast with my wand?" he asked in wonder. "Well, I guess I did. I didn't think about it. I used Harry's once years ago to open a locked door, and I've used Lavender's one time to curl her hair for Yule Ball. Hers resisted me so much, though, I figured Harry's wand answering to me was a fluke." "No one has ever used mine," he said, kissing her neck again. He didn't say it, but in addition to all of the investment and handshake and fire whiskey advice that Lucius had imparted over the years, he had been very careful to emphasize that no one should ever touch, have access to, or use his wand. That she was able to pick it up and effectively cast a spell was mystifying. He kissed her once more, cupping her head to his, then lay back looking up at her as the sun shone through her curls, catching the bits of gold and red that threaded through the brown. He was reminded of that day long ago, the day he'd pretended to be a Dementor, and she'd appeared above him on the Quidditch pitch, the sun lighting her from behind like a halo. He'd told her then that he shouldn't ever cross her mind. She was too good for him. Thank goodness she didn't listen to him. A pile of boxes were blocking the entrance to the common room when he got there, each box emblazoned with QQS, for your every Quidditch need. Looked like it weighed a ton. He'd hate to consider moving these without magic. "Isn't this great?" Theo bounded into the corridor, grin plastered upon his face. "It would have been even better if he'd waited about 20 more minutes," Draco grumbled. The featherlight charms were put into place, and they carried the boxes down the corridor and into Classroom 4. The boxes were unpacked into the office and back, and they spent a couple of hours assembling and arranging the items. By the time they were done, they had what could have passed for a Quidditch training gym, complete with massage table that Draco swore he would never touch with a 10-foot pole. That night, after dinner, the 3 wizards assembled in the office, having told Vince, Greg, and the other boys that they were going to work out and talk about dieting. It worked like a charm. All of the boys stayed behind in the common room to play exploding stap and sip mulled wine.
At 8 exactly, the door creaked open, and a mane of bushy brown curls came through. "Well, shall we get started?" she asked, with a twinkle in her copper eyes. Chapter 26. Runaway Train. The Christmas break was a welcome reprieve for everybody. Getting away from Dolores Umbridge for nearly 3 weeks sounded like paradise. Draco was pleased to ride back to London with Blaise and Theo alone. They were able to discuss defense tactics and whatever else they felt like, without prying eyes or spying ears. As they rode in companionable silence, Draco read Hogwarts, a history. Hermione claimed it was her favorite book, and Draco had to admit it was fascinating.
"Drake, your girl has passed by 3 times. I think she wants to talk to you," Blaise drawled, not even bothering to look up from a copy of the Quibbler. Draco stood so quickly he nearly fell as the train pitched slightly. He looked back at Blaise, who jerked his head left with an amused smirk. Draco set off to the left down the corridor, peering into compartments languidly as he went. He tried not to make too much eye contact with the Pansy, Vince, Greg, and Montague compartment. A group of first and second-year Hufflepuffs blushed and giggled as he nodded a hello and kept going. A compartment full of sixth-year Ravenclaws who appeared to be hotly debating something to do with arithmancy or dogs, he wasn't sure, ignored him. Finally, he came upon a compartment with Hermione, Neville, Dean Thomas, Seamus Finnegan, and one of the Patil twins, the Gryffindor one. They were a somber bunch, and looked like they'd been discussing something serious. "Sort off, Malfoy,"
Finnegan immediately called.
"Merry Christmas to you, as well, Finnegan."
Draco tipped an imaginary cap at him. Thomas rolled his eyes and laughed. Draco grinned back to the group.
"No Potter or Weasleys to entertain your lot with tales of poor indigent children and scary ghosts teaching people the true meaning of Christmas. You quoting Charles Dickens, mate? Didn't know you had it in you," laughed Thomas.
Draco smirked and polished his nails on his jumper.
"I like to consider myself well-read," he scoffed.
In truth, A Christmas Carol was another of the books in the trunk from his room, the one from Aunt A. He turned to Hermione.
"Granger, I believe we're assigned to patrol the train together for prefect duty."
In truth, they had not been. A Ravenclaw 6th year and a Hufflepuff 7th year were on duty, but he knew the Ravenclaw was embroiled in that arithmancy dog debate, and based upon the unusual smell and music emanating from the compartment into which he'd seen most of the 7th year Hufflepuffs disappear, Cambria Lawrence was going to be too busy staring at her hands and devouring whatever the trolley witch brought to do rounds. "You're right, I forgot Malfoy." Hermione stood and smoothed her jeans over her bum self-consciously, drawing appreciative stares from Thomas and Finnegan. Draco gave them both go-to-hell looks that were missed entirely by the people for whom they were intended. Neville and the Patil girl, however, caught the whole exchange and locked eyes, laughing silently. Draco wondered if the girl knew anything or was just laughing at the 2 drooling idiots.
"Be safe, Hermione," Neville called as she walked towards Draco. "I'll have her back in one piece if you're lucky, Longbottom. Can't have the class SWAT in danger. Who would make us all look bad if something happened to her? Besides, if we get hexed, I'm certain Granger's hair would be an excellent shield."
They stepped into the corridor and he closed the door behind them.
"Shall we start this way?"
Draco asked, gesturing left. He did not want to pass back by the other Slytherins with Hermione, or the giggling firsties when it came down to it. "Sure." They passed the trolley witch, a handful of loudly caroling 3rd years that he told to sod off back to their compartment, and Hannah Abbott on her way back from the loo. Hannah gave him and Hermione an appraising look, and Draco drew slightly away from Hermione. He hadn't realized until that moment that they'd been walking so close that their shoulders brushed, and they were nearly leaning into each other. Hannah gave Hermione a questioning look, and Hermione smiled and looked down. Draco groaned inwardly. Apparently, every random witch could feel something was going on between them today. After Hannah passed, Draco muttered quietly, "You want to see me?"
"Yes,
She paused as 4 second-year Slytherins stepped into the corridor, spotted the prefects, and promptly turned around to their compartment to avoid getting caught doing whatever their misdeeds they'd planned. Draco gave them his best hard stare as they passed the door. She continued,
Harry and the Weasleys left suddenly in the middle of the night. I only found out about it this morning. I wanted to message to ask you about it, but I knew with packing for Christmas and getting everyone to the train, it might look odd for you to, stare at a handkerchief periodically."
Draco narrowed his eyes. What happened?
They stopped outside the restroom, and Draco opened the door to confirm that it was empty, whilst Hermione checked the trolley witch's alcove. Once they were satisfied that they were alone, they ducked into the alcove. Hermione cast a Muffliato, and Draco cast a repelling charm and a Notice Me Not. Then he leaned against the wall, parting his feet and pulling her by the waist closer to him. He looked into her copper eyes in the filtered light from the small window, and waited for her to begin. "I don't have all the details yet. I was going to go to my parents for the holiday. We were set to go skiing in France, but I think I need to be with the Weasleys after what happened."
Draco schooled his features to hide his annoyance at this.
He knew that Hermione considered Ron and Ginny close friends. Whilst he had nothing against the little Weaselette, his feelings about Ron were well known to everyone.
"So, what happened?"
"Mr. Weasley was attacked. It was in the Ministry of Magic. It's not clear exactly how it happened, but apparently he was bitten by a snake."
"They allow snakes to roam the offices freely there?"
Draco was confused. He'd only been a handful of times within the offices of the Ministry of Magic over the years, but they always seemed like ordinary enough places, not places where a snake might hide. He remembered the various snake-related events of second year, and shuddered slightly, drawing her closer. She smiled as though knowing what he was thinking about, and rested her head gently on his chest. "He was near the Department of Mysteries. Apparently the Order is patrolling there. Professor Dumbledore would not tell me much more."
"Order," he murmured softly, not wanting to disturb her as she rested against him. He felt his chest rumble as she spoke, and she gave a small shudder of her own. He smiled above her head, resting his chin lightly on her crown, and tightening his hold on her.
"The Order of the Phoenix. It's what we call our side. They've been patrolling the corridors outside the Department of Mysteries for several months now. They seem to think that you-know-who is searching for something there."
Puzzle pieces slowly began to slide into place in Draco's mind. "And you want me to try and find out what it is for Potter?"
"If you can. We were nearly told about it this summer, but Mrs. Weasley thought we weren't ready to learn about it. But Mr. Weasley almost died. He still might. And Sturgis Podmore was sent to Azkaban for supposedly trying to break in months ago. We think he was Imperious. We think the other side is trying to get into the department and find something for him."
He thought for a moment. It might be possible to lead Lucius into a discussion about it, under the right circumstances. For her, he would try. "I'll tell you what I find out."
"Thank you." She raised her head, and for a moment Draco worried that she was about to leave, but she moved her arms up his back instead, running her fingernails through the hair at the nape of his neck. It felt amazing, and Draco closed his eyes and leaned forward to give her better access. Her lips touched his tentatively. She tasted of chocolate frogs and cherries. Hermione was amazing, so responsive to his touch, so soft. He wanted to both devour her and also have her like this all the time. His brain caught that thought like a snag on a knitted jumper before chucking it away deeper in his mind. He pulled back to look at her. Her cheeks were pink, her curls floating wildly about her shoulders and arms. He drank in the sight of his witch, her magic sparkling in the air around her.
He surged forward to kiss her fiercely, wanting to stay there in the moment with her forever. He held her close, knowing that soon they'd be spending weeks apart, and not knowing how he would stand it. 10 minutes later, Hermione stepped first into the train corridor to check that the coast was clear, and Draco followed. They stepped quickly up the walkway, eyes averted from each other in bashfulness now that they were back in the bright light of the public eye. They arrived back at the door of the Gryffindor compartment just as the train began to slow as it entered King's Cross Station. He opened the door for her to enter. "Here you go, lions. Not a hair out of place, see?" Draco said, then turned to Hermione. Now that he looked at her more carefully, however, he realized just how out of place and wild her hair actually looked. Between that and the sparkle of her eyes, the misbuttoned cardigan, and the flush of her cheeks, she looked breathtakingly beautiful. It took everything he had not to smile sappily at her. "I don't know, Hermione. It looks a little out of place," smirked the Patil twin, as she took it all in from where she was curled up with a copy of Witch Weekly. Luckily, Longbottom and the other boys were engrossed in a game of Exploding Snap, and didn't notice the exchange, or Hermione's even deeper blush. Happy Christmas, lions." Draco backed out of the compartment quickly. "Happy Christmas, Snake," Parvati, Padma trilled, her eyes still glued to Hermione, a wicked smile on her face as she looked at the incorrectly buttoned cardigan. Draco had a feeling that the giggly girl was not one to let this go, so he hurried away, heading to his compartment to gather his things. Quite a happy Christmas, indeed. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great78.